The moment I opened my front door that evening, I was not prepared for what was standing on the other side, and I mean that in every possible way a person can be unprepared for something. It had been a long, hollow kind of day, the sort where the hours drag themselves across the clock, like they have somewhere better to be but can't quite find the energy to get there. I was in my gray t-shirt, hadn't shaved in 3 days, hadn't spoken to anyone meaningful in longer than I care to admit, and then there she was, standing at the threshold of my home like a question I didn't know the universe had been building up to ask me. Her eyes were wide, caught somewhere between pride and desperation, the way a person looks when they've rehearsed a speech for hours and suddenly forgotten every single word. She was holding a small handbag with both hands, gripping it like it was the only stable thing left in her world. And before I could say a single syllable, she said it quietly, clearly, like it cost her everything she had left. "Can I stay with you?" Her name was Serena. I had known her the way you know people in suburban neighborhoods from a distance. Through brief waves across driveways, through the occasional polite smile at the mailbox. She lived 3 houses down with her husband, a man named Marcus, who drove a black SUV too fast and laughed a little too loudly at his own jokes. I knew almost nothing real about her. I knew.
You're watching Wake Up Files, where every story carries a message of hope, kindness, and unexpected miracles. If you believe one story can inspire millions, press like, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Wake Up Files so you never miss a story like this.
She had long brown hair that caught the light in a particular way when the afternoon sun hit it. I knew she wore blue a lot. I knew she walked their dog every morning at exactly 7:30, but I did not know her, not truly. Not the way you come to know someone when their carefully constructed world has finally, completely fallen apart. I stood in that doorway for what felt like a full minute, maybe longer, searching her face for context, for some frame of reference that would tell me how to respond. There were no tears, and somehow that was the part that broke something open inside me. People who are crying are still processing. People who are completely dry-eyed after a tragedy have already moved through the crying stage into something quieter, and more terrifying, a place where the grief has settled so deep that it no longer has the energy to reach the surface. That was where Serena was standing, in that wordless, exhausted place. And so I stepped aside, and I let her in. She didn't explain much that first night. She sat on my couch with a cup of tea I made her badly, I should say, because I never really learned how to make tea properly, and she just stared at the far wall like it owed her an apology. I sat across from her in the armchair, and I didn't push. I didn't ask questions. I had learned, somewhere along the rocky road of my own life, that some people don't need answers or advice in those first hours. They just need a room that doesn't feel dangerous. They just need someone to sit quietly and prove, through nothing more than presence, that not everyone in the world is going to ask something painful of them. My name is Callum, and I want you to understand something about who I was before that night. I was a man who had grown very comfortable with loneliness. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of loneliness that people write songs about, but the quiet, domestic kind. The kind where you cook dinner for one every night, and the silence in the kitchen doesn't even register anymore because you've stopped expecting anything different. I had been through a difficult stretch of years, a career that had shrunk, a relationship that had dissolved slowly and painfully like something left too long in water, and a creeping sense that life had reorganized itself around me while I wasn't paying close enough attention. I was functional. I was fine, but I was empty in the specific way that only a person who has stopped hoping tends to be. And then Serena was on my couch, and something in the air of my apartment felt different. Not romantic, I want to be careful here, because this story is not about romance in the way people expect it to be. It was something older and more fundamental than that. It was the feeling of being needed, of mattering, suddenly, to another human being in a real and urgent way. She stayed for 3 days before she told me the whole story. Marcus had not been the man she thought she married. The details unfolded slowly, piece by piece, the way ruins reveal themselves as the light shifts a little more visible each hour, a little more devastating. There had been years of quiet erosion, of small cruelties stacked on top of each other until the weight of them became unbearable. She had tried to hold her life together with both hands for longer than anyone should have to, because she was the kind of woman who believed that leaving meant failing, and she had never once in her entire life allowed herself to fail at anything, until the night she finally understood that staying was the real failure, the failure of the one commitment that actually mattered, the commitment to her own survival. What I did not expect was what those 3 days did to me. I found myself waking up in the morning with a reason to get out of bed that had nothing to do with obligation or routine. I found myself cooking actual meals, real food with effort behind it, because someone else was going to eat it. I found myself talking, genuinely talking, not just exchanging information for the first time in what felt like years. Serena was sharp and funny and searingly honest in the way that only people who have stopped performing for an audience can be. She had no energy left for pretense. And in the absence of pretense, something true grew between us. The turning point came on the third evening. I had come home from work to find her standing in my kitchen, having made dinner herself this time. She had found ingredients I didn't even know I owned and had turned them into something that smelled extraordinary. She looked up when I walked in, and for the first time since she had arrived at my door, she smiled. Not a polite smile, not a grateful smile, but a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes and changes the whole geometry of a person's face. And in that moment I felt something shift inside my chest, quietly and permanently, like a door that had been stuck for a very long time finally swinging open. We talked that night for 4 hours without stopping, about everything, about the lives we had each quietly grieved, about the versions of ourselves we had let slip away while trying to meet everyone else's expectations, about the strange and specific courage it takes to start over when you are no longer young enough to believe that starting over is easy. She told me about the dreams she had put away in boxes years ago. A graphic design business she had always wanted to build, a country she had always wanted to visit, a version of herself she had almost forgotten existed. And I listened, and I remembered my own boxed-up dreams, and something about hearing hers made mine feel reachable again. Serena stayed for 6 weeks in total. In those 6 weeks, my apartment transformed from a place I merely inhabited into a place that felt genuinely lived in, genuinely warm, and when she finally found her own apartment, signed her own lease, and stood in my doorway one last time, this time to say goodbye, she looked like an entirely different person than the woman who had arrived there. She was standing straighter. She was breathing differently. She had the look of someone who had found the ground beneath their feet again after a very long time of falling. She hugged me for a long moment before she left, and she said something I have thought about every single day since. She said that I had given her back the belief that kindness from a stranger could still exist in the world, and that believing in that had given her the strength to believe in herself again. And I stood there after she walked away and realized, with a clarity that nearly took my breath away, that she had given me something equally profound in return. She had reminded me that a life only lived for yourself eventually runs out of reasons. That the moments when we show up for each other not because we have to, not because it is convenient, but simply because another human being is standing at our door and they have nowhere else to go, those are the moments that define us. Those are the moments that make the whole long, difficult journey worth something. I am not the same person I was the night I opened that door. I started working on things I had abandoned. I reached out to people I had let drift away. I began, slowly and imperfectly, to build a life that felt like it belonged to someone who was actually present in it. All of it traces back to a single choice made in a single doorway, the choice to simply say yes when someone needed somewhere safe to land. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of a moment when someone's simple kindness changed the direction of your life, or when you were the one who needed somewhere safe and someone opened the door, please let this video know. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your small gesture of pressing a button might reach someone sitting alone right now, who needs to remember that the world still has room for human kindness. And before we end, drop a comment below and tell me, has a stranger's kindness ever changed your life? I read every single one. Because sometimes, the most important thing that will ever happen to you begins with a knock on a door you almost didn't answer.